Or should I say?
Oh, good.
Good.
If we could come back to order, we will continue the second round. I was asked at the break to make a couple of announcements. One is personal communication devices, BlackBerries, iPhones, cell phones, are interfering with the Metro TV sound feed. So if you could please turn them off, or at least have them as far away from the microphones as possible, that will help, hopefully. And the other thing I was going to say, we've also have Karen Gaffney sitting at the table. She is a representative from Lane County that will hopefully be able to help answer some clarifying questions. So they asked if it would be appropriate for her to sit at the table, and I felt it would most definitely be appropriate.
Here's where the page numbers in the budget, if they're...
Oh, yeah, and if you're referring to a section of the budget and you can give us the page number, that helps as well.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we will start the second round. Doug,
Should make people say if they like dogs.
you are the first person in the second round.
Okay.
You like
Thank you,
dogs
John.
better or cats better?
I'm not going to say. That's being recorded. A quick question. If you don't know the answer to this, you could just get back with me on it. Of all the cats and dogs that are brought in, what percentage of those are reclaimed by the owner? What percentage is adopted? And what percentage are euthanized? And what percentage are other?
Other would be maybe transferred to other facilities, that
Yeah.
we do have some of those
Right.
other. Our euthanasia rate last year, well, the flip side of that, our live release rate, which is nationally how shelters judge their outcomes. So how many animals leave either through adoption or return to owner or transferred to another agency. I think about 93% was our live release rate. And off the top of my head, I don't know what percentage are adopted versus return to owner, but I can certainly get that.
Okay. And is there a national organization that you can lean towards or get questions? 'Cause I'm supportive of John of rethinking how we spend this money, that you can learn from or access, that you have used in the past, or could, because the only thing that I could find, because there is no national organization that oversees a lot of these private shelters. Is there a national organization that you could lean on to get suggestions from, whether it's volunteerism, revenue sources, just a way to get new ideas about how to operate differently?
There are actually several. I think Councilor Solomon's report that she was remembering was the 2007 report that the county issued, which was the Safe Hospital and Treatable Animals Task Force report, and that was a fairly thorough review of best practices nationally and came up with 10 different recommendations for the county around a lot of the topics you mentioned: increasing licensing, volunteer foster programs, that array of implementing those best practices. In terms of national organizations, I think there are several different sources we look to. There's not just one. There's been, city manager mentioned no-kill shelters, so there's been a lot of work through that particular movement and a lot of important strategies that we've looked at and adopted there. There is a national, it's not in charge of regulating animal control, but there are national associations where we go to for trainings for our officers and animal control practices. And then there's, of course, the Humane Society of the U.S. and other national organizations that provide a lot of information that we use in our program development.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was really surprised to read this, but do you realize about 63% of households in the United States have a pet? And about 75 million dogs and about 85 million cats are owned in the United States. That was an amazing figure to me. You've been very helpful. Thank you very much.
Mary Ann, on two.
Yeah, we talk about efficiency. I would like to talk about effectiveness. The stats. I spent 9 years with the county discussing animal services, and early on attended many of the meetings of the committee. They went through, and you just mentioned that we do have the report, and I think it should be summarized and sent out to all of us. We did a lot of reforms already. It looks like this proposal will end up reducing the number of animal control officers, which will reduce enforcement, which will reduce fines, and that we are going to be less effective because this is a big cut in a small budget. And I think that we should look, we went ahead and did this without consultation with the people who knew, which is the county. It sounds like we thought the county was to blame, and they said they weren't asking, blah, blah, blah. But at any rate, we do need to get together, and this was dropped like a bomb, without any chance to plan. And it's not just a matter of an animal lovers. I have a cat, and there are feral cats all over my neighborhood, and because I live next to a park, and they're calling me, what do I do with this cat's getting in my house and chasing my dogs? Cats do chase dogs. And so this is looking for some outsider to tell us what to do when we have a good inside study done right here of this animal population and searching all over the country to find the best. And so we redid now what's already been done here. It isn't much different. In the county, we never had enough money, even in the 9 years I was there, to run properly everything. This is not an excuse to do a poor job in funding what I consider core animal services. And if we follow this recommendation, there may be some alternatives that can be suggested. But we don't have the information on the alternatives here and now in this county, in this city. The other thing that's been mentioned to me is maybe that we should just give city enforcement completely back to the city. I think that would mean city funding. So I don't think that's a good idea, but it's been suggested.
Thank you. Betty.
Thank you. Someone's already mentioned this, but what I wanted to say is I think we should license cats, and I know people will say that's too difficult, but it could be voluntary. Veterinarians collect dog license fees, and people who care about their cats take them to the vet, and the vets could offer to sell them a license too. And I think that would probably be, there are lots more cats than dogs, and it could probably bring in a lot of money very easily. And is there any reason why, I know people say cats have to be free, well, so would dogs like to be free, but we don't turn them free.
I know there was a mention of Calgary. They have cat licensing that's mandatory in Calgary, and certainly it does generate revenue, and it took them several years of community conversation to get to that point, because it is a huge change for cat owners to be required to do that. But it's possible.
Thank you.
Jennifer, followed by Andrea.
Oh, I'll pass, thanks. And I was going to pass too, but now that you're at the table, I guess what I would like to ask you, I forgot what I was going to say earlier, that's why I thought of something new to say. So, you know, the commissioners aren't here to speak for themselves, and I know you don't speak for the commissioners any more than staff does for council, but can you tell me where this is on their list of priorities?
Absolutely. What I know is that we've had animal conversations all year with our Board of Commissioners, and particularly the most recent one we talked about here was the facility needs. So animal services is important to the commissioners, and the proposed budget from the county administrator has a continued service level for animal services on the county side. So to the extent that that's a gauge of their support, that's there. We talk to them at least quarterly about where our statistics are. They've continued to support those efforts. So I would say animal services is a pretty high priority for the board.
Now, your role isn't actually animal services, isn't it?
Well, I'm the assistant director. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm the assistant director for Health and Human Services, and in 2007, Animal Services was moved into our department, so it's one of our.
But it sounds like it's more of your passion also, that's why.
Well, and 2 years ago, when the county had significant budget reductions, they eliminated the manager position for Animal Services, cut in half the management for that program. So the operations supervisor reports directly to me now, so I have developed increasing passion around animal services. It directly reports to me.
Well, I think you did a really good job. I've seen you speak on it before, and I really do appreciate it. You know, I know this, you know, I don't know if this is up from left field or not, John's budget. I don't know if what he's communicated with the commissioners or not, but, you know, everybody's doing more with less. And if this motion passes, it isn't it isn't because we haven't thought long and hard about it, and it isn't the end of the conversation. I would hope that we could get together and find some way to work across that friendship bridge, to work on this issue, because I do think that they need a new building. I do think that, the community is going to demand, that they have services if they go away for our not being able to fund them at the level that we have. So I don't really consider this the end of a conversation. I really consider it the beginning.
Thank you. Joe?
I want to commend John for at least having the leadership to ask a tough question, just simply, could it be more efficient? The city's having to do more with less, and just anecdotal observation, it doesn't appear a lot of people know what they do. Observation. There's a lot of passion, but no one has a really good idea of what they do, so we could have as a failure to communicate. I have no idea. A couple quick questions, though. Who sets the cost of licenses and enforcement actions?
Each jurisdiction sets their own fee for license. So the Eugene fee is set by Eugene, and the county fee.
And I believe someone said enforcement actions generated about $50,000 in revenue?
The revenue doesn't come to the county, it goes to the city, so
So just as a point of reference, guys, we had 6,200 enforcement contacts in the city of Eugene that generated $8 per enforcement. So just, I don't know, guys. I mean, this is one of those issues that's extremely emotional. I believe it's one of those issues that you just call it what it is maybe it should be one of those kind of line items that is really much more self-funded than other items. And again, I go back to the three stakeholders that are going to take care of that. Maybe the people that aren't applying or that are non-compliant, and I think I'd like to make some type of motion at the appropriate time to look at how you might be able to increase those type of fines or fees to help pay for that. The licensing issue, if you went up $10, that's $120,000 of the budget gap right there. And before everyone just, it's a 20% gap. It's $10, and there's a lot of emotion. I think people just call it what they ought to call it. It's $10. It's for animals that everyone loves. And the third, just again, determine what part of our budget is going to go to make up that shortfall. So again, from my perspective, I really think this becomes more of a revenue issue. 3.5 enforcement officers, uncle, pretty skinny. So I think we all just call it what it is and really look more on the revenue side for the non-compliance and the licensing, and just have the leadership to make those kind of decisions.
Well, if I can just insert, I would encourage you to absolutely look at your fines for noncompliance. There's a significant difference on several of those between the county and the city. And in looking at Calgary, for instance, they have about a $250 fine, which is similar to the county's for failure to license your dog. I believe last time I looked at the cities, it was $40. So there's certainly an opportunity there to say we take those infractions more seriously. And it helps us on the enforcement side, too.
I just think this is one of those line items that for people with the passion, we need to pay for. So, thank you.
Okay, anybody else here to speak to this? Sarah?
Well, just Joe's line of questioning made me think on that particular idea of increasing the fines. I mean, would that need to go through a formal process to do that? If we, as a budget committee, decided to go along with the city manager's recommendation, but we wanted to say, and we want to see some movement on, see a serious consideration about increasing fines, is that practical? Do we work that in, or is it going to be another thing that maybe might possibly happen?
I think on the process side, if the budget committee can make that as a motion, that you would want to increase the fines, for example, to a particular dollar amount, that is a motion that the budget committee can make, right?
John, actually, that would be fine, but the judge does set the schedule for that, and so it would be the judge would need to take on that review of the fine schedule. So
Recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Andrew?
Thank you. Thank you for that information. That really kind of puts things more in perspective for me. My husband recently got a ticket in Springfield. They don't have a reduction on the first ticket for speeding like we do in Eugene. It was a significant amount of money we had to pay. I think I like what we do in Eugene, but other jurisdictions don't do what we do for our community. So I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Okay, well, we should move along. I don't have anyone in the queue. My recommendation would be take this information, if you have ideas about the direction that you would like this line item in the budget to go, think about formulating a motion. Either I would like to not do it or whatever. And if you are planning on moving that we fund the $200,000, then possibly look at a source to find that. A good area to help get a motion passed.
Just want to mention again the one-time versus ongoing. This is an ongoing $200,000, and so
Yes.
I would suggest if there's a alternative source that would also be an ongoing source. The one-time investments are one-time investments.
So, think about where you want to come down on this issue. We're going to hopefully start getting intended motions submitted by next week and get this ball rolling. So, with that, thank you everybody who presented. Thank you for the pointed questions, and we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is public safety. Police presentation on strategies and the downtown safety initiative. I would suppose that would be our police. Don't put your black very close to it there.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. That's not that much.
Good evening. Okay, this is our presentation on police services and some changes that we'll be looking towards in the next fiscal year. There's a lot of wonderful conditions in Eugene, but these are the four that I deal with every day, so that's why you're only seeing these four. We have low staffing in police, we have a low criminal justice capacity, and as a consequence, a high property crime rate and a high behavior crime rate, which I'll talk about here. We move on. We have, Oregon has fewer police per capita than any other state in the United States. The average in the United States for communities over 25,000 is 2.3. Oregon averages 1.4, and Eugene is below that average. We have 1.8 officers per 1,000 here. And we're going back in time. It's not helping, though. And then the average jail beds per 1,000 arrests in the United States is about 60. Oregon has fewer of those also, 43, and Lane County has one of the lowest figures in Oregon at 11. It may be the lowest today. It has been over the last couple of years the very lowest in Oregon. 11 local jail beds per 1,000. And our index crime rate, which the most significant category of that for Eugene is property crime, is higher than the rest of Oregon and higher than the United States. And as you know, in 2008, or you may have heard me say that it's grown faster in Eugene than any other community of 100,000 or more. We had some flattening, and I don't have those figures for you, a reduction in some categories over 2009. But 2008 is representative of the trend that we've seen over the last several years. So we have more crime here than in most places per capita. And our behavior crime rate, which we don't talk about that much because they don't all include felonies, most are not felonies, but our behavior crime rate is also very high. And I'll be talking a little more about how we'll address this when I go over the downtown safety strategy later in the presentation. Our response times to emergency calls, these are crimes in progress. Some of them are life-threatening crimes in progress. Many are felony property crimes and other offenses. The response time we shoot for this category is 5 minutes. And our objective is to achieve that response 90% of the time. And as you can see, since we've been tracking roughly around 1999 or 2000, we haven't been able to meet that. And this is partly a consequence of our high crime rate and the low staffing that we have here. This measure indicates the number of arrests an officer in our agency makes. The average per officer in the United States is 22. Oregon's is a little higher, and ours is very high, nearly twice what the rest of Oregon does. This is really a pretty good indication of the workload. This is just one measure that you could use, but it's a pretty good measure of the workload that our officers are under. So a lot of us would like to move towards community policing, but we aren't even able to hit our, we have so few officers available at any given time, we're not able to hit our minimum response times. We haven't for many years, and our officers are busy investigating crimes and arresting people for those crimes. So the way that we've addressed the rising and the high property crime rate in Eugene is through data-led policing. We have a low violent crime rate in Eugene, fortunately. It's usually in the bottom 15 percentile of the United States, but our property crime rate is usually in the top 10 to 15%. And the way that we're addressing that is to maximize our authorized sworn staffing, and I'll talk about all these here in a second, to improve our crime analysis capacity in order to use our most expensive resources as efficiently and effectively as we possibly can. We need good crime analysis and good operations analysis. We're understaffed significantly in those areas. We're also applying as heavily as we can crime prevention, which is the least expensive, most effective crime reduction strategy. It isn't effective if you don't have the other components, but is the least effective, and among those that are least expensive, and among those that are inexpensive, the most effective. And then directed patrols also. We have, since October of 2008, we have worked towards trying to find an ideal balance between our overtime expense and the number of authorized positions we have vacant. We have improved on our hiring practices so they're more fluid. We don't wait until we have a number of vacancies and then start a hiring process. Instead, we receive applications almost all the time, followed shortly by interviews. So we have smaller groups that we put through the application process more often so that as a vacancy comes open, we fill it, and as a consequence, we have fewer vacancies now than we normally do, not just among sworn. We're actually within half an FTE of being fully staffed in our 911 center, which I don't think has happened since we opened.
I honor that.
This is a representation of the difference between what our authorized FTE number is, the top line, and our vacancy rate, which is the bottom line, how many of those positions we have. And you can see that in 2006, PERS was offering a pretty good deal to the people eligible to retire, so they departed. That's where we saw that dip. And then since then, we've varied between, we had a strategy of focused enforcement during certain seasons through overtime, and we've gone away from that over the last year and a half, and instead we're working towards filling positions and assigning people to specialized assignments like that instead. So that's what that represents. The other components I've talked about maximizing our staffing, and this is our an example of what our crime analysis function will produce. On a weekly basis, our crime analysts, we have only one, produces a report that they show to the police managers that determine where our workforce is going to work. They only measure these three crimes: burglaries, residential and commercial burglaries, thefts from vehicles, so when somebody breaks into a car and steals the change out of or steals an iPod or what have you out of a car, and vehicle thefts. And we barely keep up with conducting analysis of those three offenses every week. And it isn't just the data that shows where and when the crime happens, which is what you see here. The map on the left shows, and I like this one because it is a representation of the West and South University areas where we have a pretty grudging, pretty stubborn property crime problem. So it shows where the crimes happen in the map on the left. And on the right, those graphs show what day of the week they happen and during what hours of the day they happen. So patrol managers can be pretty specific about when they assign officers to reduce crime through directed patrols. But this is just one little sliver of the information that's shared and collected over the week by the crime analysts. They also read through all the related reports to burglary, theft from auto, and auto theft to learn more about the method of operation of the suspects. And then they also go over that data, that information with the detectives to learn what intelligence information they can add to this report. We collect more intelligence from patrol officers, and we put all that together into a comprehensive report for about an hour and a half once a week that's shared with all of our patrol officers and some non-sworn personnel. So it takes a lot of work to produce this, and we don't have enough staff to do any more than just this, and some weeks we can't even do this. The other the other two important elements are crime prevention, which I talked about a little bit, and directed patrols. This graph shows you the difference between the property crimes in the Kins Row neighborhood, where a lot of college students reside, and West and South University neighborhood. Okay, so this is the combined property crimes, those three categories, for West University and Kins Row, when comparing spring break of 2009 to spring break of 2010. That's the two bars on the left. The reason I've chosen these 2 years and these two locations is because our data-led policing directed our crime prevention efforts and some directed patrols to focus in West University and in Kins Row. And we did that over the course, since we started the data-led policing strategy, but specifically before winter break and before spring break, because we always see a pretty significant spike in those crimes when the students leave town. So I'm giving you this explanation to point out that it apparently works. Because in spring break of 2009, crime rate was high, as you can see in the blue line, and then we reduced it in spring break of 2010. Likewise, winter break of 2008 and winter break of 2009. So we are apparently using the few resources we have in the right places. I'm sorry, could you go back to that slide for just a second? And then the other part of this is the directed patrols. We will put patrol officers on bicycles, or we'll give them a certain mission in a part of town where we're seeing a spike in property crime. That's one component of our directed enforcement. Another is that when the 84 jail beds were added by the Board of County Commissioners, the prosecutors and our detectives, along with those from Springfield and Lane County Sheriff's Office and Oregon State Police, the prosecutors were very careful to ensure that we were holding in our jail beds the most violent offenders and the most chronic offenders. If you can hold a burglar in jail until they go to trial, you can prevent a lot of crimes. It's not the best way to go about changing the behavior of a serial offender, but with the very few jail beds we have, it is the only effective way available to us. And then they are prosecuting serial offenders by stacking up as many offenses as they can that they know they're responsible for, and rather than making deals on all those offenses, they're actually prosecuting them on all of them and sending them to prison for a longer period, which is also a way of preventing them from committing crimes. Again, it's not the ideal, but this is how we have to use what we have efficiently. We are, within the police department, working to repurpose some of our budget. So our authorized budget for FY10, very similar to what we hope to have in FY11, we'll be able to reduce some overtime in administrative type of overtime for line staff, and also some other changes that we think we can make that would allow us to take money that we're spending on one area and instead use it to add a crime analyst, operations analyst, 2 officers downtown, and a forfeiture analyst and supervisor, which I'll explain here in a minute. The crime and operations analysts, I've told you a little bit about what they do. This is critical to ensuring that we're using our officers and detectives in the best possible way toward reducing crime. It's much less expensive to add these positions than it is to add police officers, and they ensure that we're constantly making adjustments based on where the greatest need is for our policing efforts. Without them, we're just extraordinarily limited in making intelligent, evidence-based decisions about how to make Eugene safer. So that's why those are important. The forfeiture analyst is a self-funding position. We process so many forfeitures a year. We're very confident that it's more than enough to fund this position that would be able to take over the management of that, while also allowing us to fill what has been an acting supervisor's position for our property control unit. So this is a self-funded position that solves two critical needs, and it's nice to be able to move ahead with that. This is our mayor. The downtown strategy. I'm not going to go over the whole strategy because my purpose is to talk about the safety improvements that we hope to make. But this slide is here just to remind you that this is the universal approach that the city is taking towards downtown. And it includes the public safety plan that I'm going to go over here in a minute, LCC, the VA clinic, and the farmers market improvements. The Downtown Safety Initiative came out of the recommendations from a task team that the Planning and Development Director, Susan Muir, and I put together, and we facilitated. It was about 15 members who began their work by asking what are the conditions downtown that are contributing to the safety problems we have. That body made a recommendation to the executive team, and then the executive team prepared a 12-point strategy that will be outlined here in a second. But the conditions that are contributing to the challenges downtown are the lack of accountability, which I've talked about. We don't have enough police or jail beds. That some of the behavior that is troublesome downtown is illegal, and some of it is just unpleasant behavior. And there isn't a great cohesive plan among all the security and social service agencies and efforts that are going on downtown. And some of the space enables some of the bad behavior. You may not be able to tell, but there are three categories of initiatives on this list. The top category is in green, the second category is black, the bottom category is red. Those first few items are currently funded and underway. The City Council allowed the use of some of the contingency to pay for a downtown work crew. That'll be a sentence that certain offenders will get from our municipal court. We will add lighting downtown. That money has been appropriated, and we're preparing a plan. The Planning and Development Department is preparing a plan for that. We're already have established an effective council number of representatives from a variety of agencies that are coordinating our efforts downtown, the efforts that are already in place, but if better coordinated would help to reduce crime. And we are addressing the consumption of fortified wine and malt liquor. We're talking with the OLCC, who would need to make an administrative change to their rules that would enable the City Council to pass an ordinance to do this. I know you're aware that over 3 months this last winter, we got voluntary compliance from a number of markets in a certain geographic area, and that reduced crime by 70% in that area, and just by voluntary compliance. The sergeant in charge of the downtown bike team this summer is expanding that voluntary program in collaboration with OLCC, and I'm sure it'll be just as effective. So we'll get there. We may not get there legislatively immediately, but we will make the change that needs to happen. The automated crime reporting has been funded, and we're working on the software and a system for collecting that information. And we are still analyzing the downtown public safety zone. That'll probably produce a recommendation that we make some adjustments, and I think City Council has that on their calendar later this year. Cahoots, I'll show you a couple of slides here when I'm finished with this list. We have a Cahoots contract for $250,000 a year. We will double that by adding essentially another contract with perhaps a slightly different focus. And then the task team made a pretty firm recommendation that we think a little differently about the Business Improvement District and whether or not fees should be different, the district should be expanded, so we need to still look at that. The plan would include the addition of 5 officers to the 2 that are downtown already, a sergeant and a community service officer, in order to have a robust community policing team down here that can do enforcement and problem solving and focus on a geographical area where those types of crimes are happening, which is somewhere between Jefferson Street and Kincaid and perhaps 13th or 14th Avenue in the river. And then we saw in Portland an umbrella organization that coordinated everything that you see above and a lot more. So that's a direction we'd like to see the city take here. We have been discussing with Springfield and Lane County the addition of some jail beds. It would be 10 jail beds under this plan. And then probably the last item is the one we've done the least with so far because there's still a lot to learn about it, and also known as wet beds. It's where we take people who are drug abusers and alcohol and addicted to alcohol. And we find housing for them where they can still be subject to those addictions, but work perhaps towards recovery while not being on the street in a very unhealthy environment, in a much safer place. We found that we've seen in other parts of the country where this has reduced admissions to emergency rooms and places like the Buckley House. So overall, it could be a savings, but there's a lot more to learn about that. I heard your question last week about the Cahoots program. The email that you mentioned was not from Whitebird. It was from an employee of Whitebird. It doesn't represent Whitebird's position on this. Our managers assigned to this and Whitebird managers who are working on this program and the potential that we might double it would prefer, and I agree, and the fire department does too, that we really need a van to do this work properly. With the contract we have now, one van isn't enough, but it's all we have. If we have 2, essentially we double the contract, we'll have two different programs out there working with the homeless and people who suffer from mental health conditions who are homeless, with slightly different missions, slightly different focus. And to try and accomplish that with only one van we wouldn't be able to get there. As you can see, the equipment in these is fairly sophisticated. The van is a place where they provide not just shelter, but some medical attention. It isn't the kind of thing that you could get as off a used car lot. This is the kind of thing where you invest properly in it if we're going to care for humans and provide some medical care and take it from place to place and do some problem solving in there. So this, by doubling the contract, it would be another $250,000 a year. The contract the police department manages. The first year it's higher because we need to purchase and outfit this van properly. And that's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I got people signing up. We have Andrea to start. Let me just get this queue going here. So it's Andrea, Harry. Chris, did you have your hand up? No? Alan? Mary Ann? George Brown? Anybody else? All right. Well, I'll just raise them, but we've got a queue started. So it's Andrea, then Harry.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that 911 is almost at 100% of employees. I know for years that they've been working at a deficit. I'm glad to hear that. A couple questions and then a comment. So we always start these presentations with statistical information, us versus different states, and there's always a question that I have asked, and I don't think I've ever gotten an answer. I know that in the city of Eugene anyway, our employees get paid a living wage, and they've got, for the work they do, they get paid, they get compensated well. So my question is always, like if we compare ourselves to a city in Florida, is it equal in the budget as far as how much money we spend on our level of employees versus the city in Florida spends on their their employees in the budget process. And the other question I had about that, when you say law enforcement per capita, are you talking about just police on the street? Or are you talking about like county beds and prison beds, or is it just policemen on the street?
The police staffing slide is about sworn officers in Eugene.
Okay, but when you say per capita, there's so many here, and when that statistical information is gathered nationwide, are they just talking about police officers on the street?
They're talking about sworn officers employed by an organization.
Okay.
And if you're asking about corrections deputies,
Yeah.
I don't know how they factor.
I mean,
but I can-
if they factor in, because, when you look at that across the board, I'm just curious. Anyway, so, cahoots. And also before I go on to cahoots, so OLCC is the one who governs who sells liquor where and what kind. So if there's anything that you need us to do as elected officials or any of the other community members to talk with our state representatives and our senators, I really think that this is something that we need to have a little bit more control on. They've owned the liquor laws, in perpetuity in the state of Oregon, and I think that we should be able to help encourage them to listen to their voting public. In cahoots, I understand, I had sent the email out that was forwarded to me from one of my friends, and I just felt like that was something that should be shared with everybody, because that's their perspective. I do agree that they need another van, though. I do think, but they felt that the filling from, oh, goodness,
Terry.
Chief, I've had a question I've wanted to ask for a long time, and that is, are the leaves on the badge that you wear really marijuana leaves? No. Well, that's
Better answer that one.
We've had a lot of problems over the years with where we're going to put people when we arrest them. And when I was looking at the budget, one of the things that I noticed, there were two departments that actually were cut in terms of total funding. One of them was, of course, animal control. We've already discussed that. The second one was municipal court.
Yeah.
How does that help this discussion?
You're going to catch them, you can't cross it.
I'm Chrissy Hammond, Central Services Director. Municipal Court is reducing some staff. So the City Prosecutor's Office is reducing by a half a position. Municipal Court is adjusting by a whole. They have done a lot of streamlining of operations and the way that they're delivering service. They've changed their docketing practices and things like that. And so, so far, the changes that they're making, they're able to maintain a consistent pattern in addressing the workload.
Okay, because one of the things that the chief pointed out is that it's very important to slow down offenders, especially repeat or serial offenders. And how would that be? How will we achieve that in this budget?
Well, we didn't make any reductions to the jail services contracts or the other work crew contracts. We're still moving through cases the same way that we do in terms of people that are incarcerated at the jail and arraigning them in the same timely manner. What we're hoping to do is maintain our sanction levels at the level that they're currently at. So there's a wide range, as you know, there's a very big difference between the cases that are jailable offenses and non-jailable. And so we're really trying to focus our efforts on making sure those folks are handled in a timely manner. There were some contract reductions made, but they were not to the jail.
So the short answer is that the serial offenders are going to spend more time in jail. Is that what you're heading toward?
That's the hope. I mean, as the chief was talking about, there's the goal is to also add some additional jail beds, and we're exploring those options and looking at ways to add more sanctions so that we're very efficient in how we're handling our chronic offenders.
And I appreciated the comment about the jail beds in Springfield or working with Lane County. Is that where they are, and where are those beds paid for in this budget?
The jail beds are paid for out of the municipal court budget, and so is the work crew that we have with the county. And we are in discussion with the city of Springfield to see if we can acquire additional jail bed space at Springfield. They house a different type of offender and don't offer the same service level that we get at Lane County, so we need a balance of both to address the community needs.
But it seems a bit unusual that you can decrease the cost of the municipal court, at the same time doubling the number of bed spaces, because we've only got 11, don't we, right now?
We have 15.
I'm sorry, 15. The 11 that was referred to on slide on
That's
page...
a ratio. What we have.
I beg your pardon, that's a ratio.
Right. And I believe that that ratio probably includes like all of the beds that are available to the offenders, not just Eugene Municipal Court offenders. So we contract for jail bed space specifically for Eugene offenders.
So how many jail beds does the city of Eugene, on a typical time, actually contract for in whatever jurisdiction?
15. The city of Eugene Municipal Court has 15. There are other beds available for state offenses through the county.
Okay, and those are through the county. And so the extra beds you're talking about are going to come through that side?
No, they would come through, I'm sorry if I'm not being clear, the 10 beds would be added for municipal offenders because we pay to guarantee that bed space. And so it's just like we do with the 15 jail beds that we contract for. The service reductions that were made had to do with contract reduction costs and streamlining the docket. So we reduced some attorney costs both on the prosecution side and the defense services side, and also made some efficiencies and made some adjustments in the way that we're handling the paper flow. So, go ahead.
Okay, and so when we talk about the number of arrests per officer, which is, what, triple what it is on the national average, doesn't that usually take the officer's time away to go to the courts?
Maybe I could just clear a couple things up. The Lane County has about 200 jail beds for local offenders right now. Eugene leases 15 beds, so they have 215 local beds. When we arrest somebody on a state offense, they go into those local beds, but so do those arrests from other jurisdictions. And what we hope to do, what we're going to do in this next fiscal year, and we're discussing it with Springfield and Lane County, is add to that 15 number, make it 25, in order to help address the behavior crime problem that we have here. Now, that figure of 60, that's the average arrest per officer per year, is probably many of the same offenders that we're arresting over and over. It's expensive to arrest somebody for a crime, put them in jail. When they're released, they're given a summons to show up for an arraignment. They don't show up, a warrant's issued, and we'll arrest them again and again and again like that. Or we arrest them when they commit their first burglary, their second, and so on.
So the strategy you're working on now, how will that slow that process down?
By adding 10 jail beds, we will be able to hold more people accountable, partly to hold them over to trial, but partly for sentencing.
And 10 is adequate?
10 is not adequate, but it
what would be adequate?
Multiples of 10.
And finally, the last question. Of the 4 areas that we're working on in terms of targeted for the Urban Renewal District, the Farmers Market, VA Clinic, the LCC campus, and public safety, what percentage of funds as allocated of all of those to Farmers Market improvements?
$500,000 out of 16 million, right? 17 million. Yeah, 17. $500,000 out of 17 million.
Thank you.
If I could just clarify one more thing to be clear about the 10 jail beds. So they're part of the 12-point plan that the chief was referring to. So those jail beds aren't fully funded yet. I just wanted to make that clear.
George Brown.
Thank you. I read the Register Guard, I think we all did a few weeks ago, that property crimes went way, way down last year. And I want to congratulate the department for all their good work there. I just have a few questions. Just going back briefly to that 1.18 sworn per 1,000, that does not include staff people in the office, right? Like analysts or data analysts or
just sworn
property managers or anything. It's just officers cruising around in their car on their bicycles. Right?
No, it's sworn. So it includes me, which is not on the bicycle.
Anyone with a gun.
All right.
No, it includes detectives.
Well, yeah.
It's a simple way to look at it.
Everybody from a new recruit,
Right.
patrol officer, detectives, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, and
Okay. And then it's my understanding that this Downtown Urban Renewal Plan amendment, if and when it actualizes itself, would increase the funding, would buy up the parking garages and then increase the police department funding by approximately $700,000 a year. Is that a rough ballpark
700,000 to
figure?
800,000, yes.
For 800,000?
700,000 to 800,000, yes.
For the seven new officers. And they're being spoken of as being just for downtown, as part of the Downtown Safety Initiative. But in reality, using your data-led policing model, they would probably start off down there, but then you would redirect them anywhere in town that they needed to go, wouldn't you? I mean,
They would focus on behavior crime, and it has always been concentrated in an area that I would say probably includes Jefferson to Kincaid and 13th to the river.
kind of getting over in the University District a little
Yes,
bit, maybe?
and to
Okay.
be effective, they need to constantly move to where the crime is happening.
Right.
Moving crime once, behavior crime doesn't eliminate it or reduce it, but it will over time if we stay on top of it.
Sure, they just go to a different neighborhood, just kind of bleed out over to Whitaker, over to the university or somewhere else. So my point was, I think it was just for people watching maybe to realize that they're not just going to be walking around on the same blocks downtown. They're going to be fluid. They're going to respond to where crime's happening.
That's right. If I could just add one more thing, and they'll be doing the problem-oriented policing, so they'll try and understand why crime is happening in a certain place and change it.
Okay.
But the voluntary ban on sales of certain alcoholic beverages is an example of that.
And my last question, going back to the jail beds, the 10 new capacity that we're seeking, if this was at the county jail, how much would that be? 400,000, 500,000?
About $420,000
Is what I
a year
remember.
if they were only county
Okay.
beds, yes.
Maybe cheaper in Springfield?
Yes,
That's the idea?
that's what it looks like.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Next, we have Alan, followed by Mary Ann.
I, too, wanted to congratulate you, Chief, on reduction in property crime. It dropped dramatically this last year. Do you know those statistics?
Not off the top of my head, but do you have that one? No, I'm sorry, we don't have them.
But it was pretty dramatic, as I recall. And also, I think it's great that the 911's fully staffed finally. The other day, we were talking about seniors on patrol, and you were going off to meet with them. The evening we were talking to, and you mentioned how many there were that were the volunteers. Do you remember it?
101.
101 seniors on patrol volunteers,
Yeah.
which is really, and what do they do?
Well, they are 101 highly motivated Eugene community members. They do the Huckleberry Patrol, which is graffiti eradication or abatement. They do home vacation checks. They'll go to any one of our homes and help us catalog the valuables we have there, take photographs of them, put them in a spreadsheet, and give us all that back with photos of each of the items.
Great.
They help with our investigation section. They help retrieve video evidence after certain crimes have occurred, burglaries and financial crimes and robberies and so on. They help with the development of some of our programs. They're helping us solve cold murders. A lot of things.
Yeah, it's a great program. A lot of stuff that we either don't get to or takes cops off the street. The fortified wine and malt liquor, you mentioned that OLCC needs to administratively change their rules in order us to do an ordinance to ban that in the city. Is that likely to happen?
I don't know yet. The legislature, state legislature, may need to make a legislative amendment to the administrative rule that enables, that allows communities to pass their local ordinance. Right now, there is a discrete administrative rule that permits communities of larger than 300,000, I think, there's only one of those in Oregon, to have an ordinance like this in a fixed geographical area within their community. That's what I understand about it, so I'd have to do more research to verify exactly what the limit is, but Eugene doesn't qualify right now, so that's a change.
So I had the same thought as Councilor Ortiz, that if there's something that we can do to help with the legislators and get the state to allow us to do that, I think that's an important part of this plan. And then finally, we did amend the urban renewal downtown police officers. They're not only to include property crimes so that they can work on those issues as well as behavior crimes downtown. So that's part of the plan.
Mary Ann.
Yes, I would also like to commend you on doing an analysis of your police operations to be more effective. I think that's better than being efficient. You can do both, but it's hard. I am still a little confused on the difference that was brought up by Terry of lowering the court fees. You seem to be saying that we're going to be more efficient with the courts, we've changed the rules and so forth. But with you arresting more people, having more beds to put them in, holding them longer, which I've also heard you say, it seems to me they're always all going to have to go to court and have some kind of sentence or deliberation. So that would seem to me, if it works, to get the people off the street and into the judicial process, something happened to them, that will increase the numbers of people coming into the court system. And I heard some sort of thing that maybe it will be so efficient that they won't need an increase in court staff. So that I'm a little confused with that. Can you clarify that for me?
So one of the things I would say is that remember the types of crimes that are being cited for don't all go through Eugene Municipal Court. So there'll be a percentage of them that would still go to circuit court. And so there's a split there. The municipal court has made changes in their docketing practices. And so in the way they're processing cases has changed. And so the judges worked very hard over there to streamline as much as possible. And some of the changes that they're making are in contracts, not in staffing levels. They're looking at automating their paper flow processes and things like that to increase efficiency. So, Chief, did you have anything?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Betty?
Oh, thank you.
I'm sorry. And then it'll be Claire after that.
Sorry. I just have a few questions. Under behavior crimes, there was a category called other sex crimes. What are they?
Other sex.
Well, I don't know exactly how these are very general categories because they need to apply to each state, and every state categorizes certain offenses a little bit differently, so it's a pretty broad category. I'd have to guess at this, but we'll check on it. I'm pretty sure that's probably public indecency type of offenses.
That's what I was thinking.
Oh, okay. I heard that happens in the library parking lot.
Yeah.
Just reminded me. I forgot that. The slide that was titled Data-Led Policing, the charts, you said you could do that according to whether you have the ability or the... I wondered if that isn't something volunteers could do.
This all is data that's considered intelligence information.
Oh, so they wouldn't have...
They wouldn't be...
Okay.
do that.
Okay. Thank you. And one more. Under where you talk about, under Downtown Safety Initiative, the public safety zone, are you talking about exclusion ordinance?
Yes.
And when does that expire? Or
August.
August. Okay, I'll just say I hope that we don't renew it, but thank you.
Thank you. Claire?
Hi, Chief.
Hello.
So I saw the C attachment C and attachment G, so maybe some of what I was going to say will be in there. I was hoping that we've got some details in terms of the cost for, well, I mean, it sounds to some extent you're not proposing an increase in the budget except for planned additional officers and then the Cahoots service.
We're not planning to increase the budget.
Yeah.
We're going to repurpose some funds.
Okay, so that's good. So I'll look at those details, and if I have questions, I will get back to you or share them with the group. And maybe this is a big can of worms, but I'm just curious about how the Cahoots funding ended up in the public safety budget, and if there's any consideration about moving it into the human services funding stream.
Good point.
I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. It's just a thought that I had. And there may be some history and some reason why it's housed in public safety, and it might be good for it to be there, but I just raising that thought. And so in terms of the Cahoots proposal, knowing exactly what they're thinking, how much this van might cost and how they're going to allocate the funds that they are getting from us would be really valuable information for this body. And I was glad that Councilor Brown articulated the idea that if we add 5 more public safety officers under this rubric of downtown public safety, that they're not necessarily going to be limited patrolling downtown. That seems like a huge increase in officers in a limited geographical space, and I think there's lots of needs around the city outside of the downtown core for public safety. And so if we're using the data-led policing, then we need to be following that model and not feeling like, no, those cops have to stay downtown because that's been put under that downtown public safety initiative heading. So I just want to make sure we're all clear about that. And I'm wondering if there might be some role for these wonderful 101 volunteers. I'll come back for round 2, but obviously we don't want them having criminal contacts, but in terms of downtown and being ambassadors for helping people connect with social services and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah. George Poling, followed by Joe.
Well, over the years, I've had the opportunity to see the good work that Cahoots can do for our community. And I may have asked this in a work session about the Downtown Safety Initiative, or it may have been with one of my discussions with Christy. But I asked at one time if we could kind of, if the statistics was there to get a breakdown of the call load that Cahoots handles in the downtown area versus the rest of the city and the type of calls. And just to give us an idea exactly how much of their time is spent in that downtown core area. I think it was at one of our work sessions. So if I could get that out to the Budget Committee also, I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
That's it.
Joe.
One is a education question for the chief. If you were to take just 10 habitual nonviolent criminals, just education, just over time, whether it be 1, 3, 4, 5, 7 years, what percentage of those individuals eventually get rehabilitated? Just more of an...
I don't know the answer to that, but what we do know from studies is that the earlier the criminal justice system intervenes in an offender's crime style cycle, the more likely they are to be rehabilitated. But the longer it goes on without intervention, the more difficult it'll be for that person to change.
Very good. This might be a question for Christy. What percentage of fines or fees that are levied at the municipal court level actually go into the general fund, if I'm asking that correctly?
100%.
100% of the revenue, other than parking-related fines, goes into the general fund.
And do you know what that ballpark number is?
You know what that was last year? About 2.7? About 2.7 million is what? I could look it up, but I'll look it up for you and make sure that's right. But I think that's right under 3.
And do we know what percentage of fees and levies are actually assessed, and what percentage are actually? So of that 2.7, what's that against what assessment level?
I mean, in terms of what the judge imposes?
Exactly.
Or?
So they,
Collection ratio.
Collection.
A collection rate? Well, the collection rate, it just depends on the type of charge and the fine amount imposed by the judge. And so, for instance, minor traffic charges generally end up being paid at a lot higher rate than the misdemeanor type charges do. So I would have to go back and do some analysis work to actually, unless, Jeff,
What are you doing?
There is a parking thing in here.
I think Christy kind of hit it on the head. That's kind of a tough number to pull without getting very, very specific about the type of case and that sort of thing. But she's right. As far as traffic citations, we do have a much higher percentage that pay versus some of the misdemeanors and some of the individuals that, basically the crimes don't produce as much revenue. The other thing that you mentioned, too, was how much is actually assessed. So that's sort of a different question, too. So when, if you get a traffic citation, there's a base fine amount that the judge imposes. But actually, if you go to court, and there's a trial or the judge hears it, it could actually, there's a maximum fine amount too. So the scenario could be that you get a reduction, but you could also, depending on the situation, have to pay more than what was actually cited based on the particular situation. So it does fluctuate quite a bit based on the judicial decision of that.
Any speculation why the minor traffic fines have a higher payment rate than?
Well, often individuals will lose their license, and so there's a pretty vested interest to pay your fine. And
that's exactly what I wanted to ask. So the only point I'm asking is, I'm going to make up a number, Christy. Well, let's say, for example, it's a 50% conversion rate. I know there are certain things such as child support that if they're not paid as agreed, they're reported on credit reports. And there is a huge motivation for those that maybe not be attuned to their obligations. So, and if for some reason they actually delayed those payments or actually ignored that, at some point, a certain percentage of that is actually going to be collected. So I'm trying to get an idea. I'm sure some will be uncollectible, but...
So we have an internal collection section, and we have an individual, and they really pursue accounts, and they work with individuals on payment plans. So, if somebody comes in and they don't have the ability to pay a fine, we'll work with them on a realistic payment plan. We have a lot of flexibility as far as that goes. For the accounts that we get that just flat out don't pay, and we have a difficult time following up with them, we also contract with an external agency, a collection agency, and they have a lot more resources. They're a very big company statewide, and then they can pursue those using their own avenues. And also they offer payment plans as well, too.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I put myself down next. I just want to make it clear to the body and some of the other members who may not be as clear, things how we are the stewards of the Urban Renewal District budget as well. I think that there were things represented here in the downtown initiative, and as far as the budgeting goes, at least the way that I heard it, we were talking about adding jail beds, we're talking about adding officers. Those are if the urban renewal or the tax increment funding is approved by the city council after a public hearing. So those are decisions that are forthcoming, correct?
With the exception of 2 officers. So we have 2 assigned downtown now, but with our repurposing, we would add 2 more. That would come from the FY11 budget.
Okay.
And then the urban renewal would do the rest.
Okay, so just so that the people are here, is that would come forward in supplemental budget 1 if it goes forward as is anticipated to get these jail beds and these things funded. Is that when you would expect to see the changes both in the URA and in the budget documents that we have coming forward?
I'm not sure about the exact timing of the process, but I want to point out the jail beds are not part of that. It's the police officers. So we're looking for alternative funding streams for the jail beds.
Okay. Really? And that would be in a supplemental. You're not sure which supplemental, correct? Correct. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that, because there was a little bit of graying here, at least in my view, and I think I'm a little further. So like on that slide that showed the Downtown Safety Initiative, some of those things that were on the lower half of those slides would be funded by a switch in the tax increment funding by paying off the parking garage using that debt service money, which is free up, correct?
Correct. Right.
Okay. Okay, I'll just collect my thoughts and maybe come back for a second round. I just wanted the body to know that there's other things going on with that. And what is the timeline for that public hearing and that vote?
May 10th is a work session. May 24th is the council action. We've
already had the public hearing.
We've already had
the public hearing. Okay.
24th is council action.
Thank you. Shonda.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge Chief Kearns and the police department. for the creative energy and strategies that have come out recently and the work that's been done. For example, the crime analysis, driving when and where to put patrols. I think that's great. I just have one question. You mentioned the second Cahoots van and doubling that program, and you said that each van would have 2 different missions, and I'm just curious what those 2 missions would be.
Well, presently, the Cahoots van works all over town, responds as needed. If we, in this second contract, their purpose would be to help make downtown a safer place, which is a more focused purpose than the van presently has. And probably they'd end up doing a lot more problem solving than they do now, and they'd have more time to be able to do that effectively. There are 100 stories behind that problem-solving comment.
Yes.
If I can only tell you a couple of them, you'd appreciate what it means. But an individual who is homeless and chronically intoxicated and out on the street in an unsafe environment has many different pieces to their life, any one of which could help put them into a better place. So giving a Cahoots driver and assistant the opportunity to work through all those different opportunities and put that person into better places is a slightly different focus than what the van has today.
So, is it? I guess my understanding is a little bit limited, but is the van as it is now just responds to when calls are made?
It is. They do some patrolling, so they'll contact people that way, but mostly it's response to calls.
So the second van could then, like you said, be more patrolling, seeing things that are happening in certain parts of town?
I think the second van would be focused in the area where most of the behavior crime happens and would be able to be more proactive with the individuals that they encounter there. And some of it would be proactive work they do on the street, some of it would be response to calls for service.
Thank you. That's all.
So we're going in round 2.
Round 2? Anybody for round 1? Andrea?
Thank you. So I guess I just want a clarification between your definition of what a wet bed is versus like what we have with Buckley House.
Something different.
Yeah, Buckley House has a sobering station where when somebody, they'll either voluntarily go or we'll take them there, and they sober up, and then they have some detox beds. This is a service that's provided for people who are not, while lodged there or while staying there, abusing alcohol or drugs. A wet bed is a housing transitional type of place where somebody who is an alcoholic can still reside there in a much safer environment while still abusing alcohol, but working towards a better lifestyle.
That's not true.
In some communities, and these are usually staffed by medical personnel and other social service professionals. In some communities, they're even allowed to drink while on the premises. But those are the kinds of decisions we'd have to make as we went along with it. We'd want to tailor a service like this that would work well.
Thank you for that clarification. So I wanted to finish my comments about Cahoots. They are pearls in our community. I think people don't realize the level of education and experience. They all have to be EMTs to work on that, and I know a lot of the workers themselves actually are PhDs. And it surprises me when they go and get a job that they're ending up being directors of different organizations, because that's the level of commitment and education that they have on that. And any which way we want to get another team on the street, would really be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Terry?
I'm glad we're having a chance to talk about Cahoots quite a bit, because it is indeed one of those, I think it is a well-known, wonderful tool. 2 years ago, however, we had the Mayor's Homeless Task Force, and there was a discussion among the panels of Cahoots, the police department, and the hospital about these people and individuals that are chronically alcoholic or drug affected, which you were referring going back into the wet housing or the wet beds, as you may call them. And one of the conclusions that came out of that study was that absolutely was one of the greatest keys to keeping and diminishing the amount of repetitive bad behavior on the street. And it's surprising to me that that would not have been an issue that's been pushed up higher in the priority list, because at that time, it was identified as one of the easiest ways to find a way to get people off the street that are chronic reoffenders, and that was by all three of those jurisdictions. So could you tell me what kind of timeline we have toward moving toward that type of housing, and what kind of process we're going to do to get there?
We haven't fleshed out a plan for that yet. It would be a sizable investment for Eugene. So as that moves ahead, I could report back, but I'm not sure we'd have much to tell you before the end of the budget stage.
Well, the concern was is that when Cahoots and the police department had the chat with us, it was you can arrest people or you can pull them off the street and you can counsel them endlessly. But chronic offenders, there's not a huge number of them, but those chronic offenders that go back and forth that you're alluding to are on the street and they don't get out. And one of the things that's necessary is a mandated program through the courts. Is that part of your strategy on that also?
With the wet beds?
Yeah.
It is a potential element of it, yes.
Okay. My suggestion is that you're not going to succeed in this, in your efforts just by increasing the amount of Cahoots vans out there. Because ultimately, they're going to have to deal with Willamette treatment, and then Willamette treatment's going to have a way to release them back out. And that's what we learned through that task force. And so until that final way to get people slowed down enough is actually identified and addressed and put into the budget, all efforts are going to release these people back out on the street endlessly over and over again. So I would strongly encourage you to get that as part of the agenda.
I would, if I could just respond. There is no one thing that in itself will turn the dials on that problem. But we think we've put together with this downtown strategy a combination of initiatives that together could make things much better. But I completely agree with you. The other components of helping people who are chronically on the street, drug and alcohol addicted, we need to improve on those services.
Jennifer, I'm going to slide you in because you weren't in round one.
Thank you. Chief, I think I just heard Andrea say that the Cahoots drivers are EMTs. Is that right?
I believe that's right.
Yeah. So they are not cops?
They're not police.
They are not.
No, they work
safety
for Whitebird. Our contract is with Whitebird. Whitebird hires the staff who work in the van, and they're dispatched by our dispatchers.
And would this $325,000 pay? Is it paying for just the van, or is it paying for the van and drivers?
In the first year, it pays for the van and the drivers. The second year and outgoing years, it'll be at today's costs of maintaining one van. So about $250,000 a year.
And is maintaining a van, you mean maintenance or the driving of the van?
Maintenance.
It's operation, the drivers and the maintenance. Operating and maintenance. The $250 pays for one van to operate for the year, drivers and maintenance. Yes.
So if we're paying for the one they currently have,
Yeah.
and we're adding a second one, who's going to be paying for the drivers for the second van?
We are. That's that ongoing $250,000.
What? I thought that was additional.
Sorry, our contract will go from $250,000 to $500,000 ongoing.
Yes.
And a one-time.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Van.
Okay, I get it. All right, thank you.
And since you bring it up, if I could just say one more thing about the Cahoots van. The reason that it's managed by the police department is that most of the calls were calls that police were handling. Some were fire calls. And we dispatch them over the radio. The 911 center is within the police department. And it just, the coordination and the management of that contract works out very smoothly by leaving it to the police department.
Can I just ask one follow-up? Well, how do the EMTs deal with belligerent clients? Does a cop accompany them on the call?
These are calls that police used to handle. I remember when Cahoots started, I thought, why in the world would we want to work with them? And then they started handling the things that we had handled, and it's been an awesome service. So these are they work with people who are in a severe alcoholic state, inebriated state, or under the influence of drugs, or in a mental health crisis who are not combative and who are not resistant, but would, to the degree possible, be cooperative with somebody who's there to help them. So it's a fairly large category of calls that our fire department, police department no longer have to deal with, and someone who is thinking about how to ideally place this person is instead working with them. I did a ride-along with them a couple of months ago with Cahoots, and it's amazing all the things they'll do with one individual that they pick up. A juvenile girl who was in a mental health crisis the night I rode went from her home to the hospital. At the hospital, they picked up someone who had been treated there and needed to go to another facility in West Eugene. They took them there. We picked up a intoxicated person who needed to be detoxed from a patrol officer in North Eugene and took him to the Buckley House. The whole night was one experience like that after another. So it's all the type of work that we shouldn't have our police doing. Unfortunately, we have this high-quality service instead.
Claire.
Yeah, so the Cahoots folks are very well trained, very professional, and my understanding is at this point they only take people places voluntarily unless they've been taken into custody by the police. So if they're just approaching someone, who's intoxicated and on the sidewalk, they won't forcibly take them away. They'll have a conversation with them and ask them if they want assistance. And if they don't want assistance, they will leave them there if, they're not committing any illegal act.
That's right.
So I'd love to get a little detail, maybe in a memo, on the downtown work crew and how that will operate and how that will intersect with the municipal court, which is my assumption. And, while we're talking about Cahoots and the great service they provide, I am going to be looking at our human services allocation and wanting to make sure that there is a Buckley House for folks to go to, and there is a shelter care, and there are these other services are still whole and able to provide the services that our community really needs to deal with the folks who the Cahoots van may be encountering. And I do remember, I don't know if it was Councilor Polling or another councilor asking for details about the calls for service that Cahoots takes in the downtown core, and so I'm surprised that answer hasn't been available already, because that was months ago. And maybe even a prior budget cycle. So I would really like us to get that information so we can be more informed about that. Thank you.
All right, I'm back in the queue. And yes, go ahead.
I'm Jeff Perry. I introduced myself earlier, but I'm the court administrator, and I know a little bit about the downtown community service program that we're working on. So we're actually very close to executing a contract with Downtown Eugene Incorporated to implement the program. What it will include is basically, actually let me start from the top. The court will actually send someone to community service. It could be a sentence, it could be voluntary. There's a couple different ways that individuals can get into the program, but from there it will be the community service, the downtown community service program will be an option for individuals to do their community service. And the program itself is going to basically include downtown cleanup, some graffiti removal, and a variety of related tasks that DEI will manage. At the moment, the program is going to be a Monday through Friday operation, 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. It's sort of a pilot project because we're going to see how many individuals we can get into the program. If we don't have a lot of success there, we have the ability to shift it, maybe move it to a weekend or something like that. But the intent is to have defendants go into the program and perform cleanup services and graffiti removal and a variety of other things in the downtown area. And so, but I mean, I have a contract just almost ready to sign. So it should happen in the very, very near future. In May would be my expectation. So we will see something soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I put myself back in the queue.
Are we in the second round yet?
Yeah, you're next after John.
Let's keep track.
Seeing how these budget issues are kind of running concurrent, the approval of the urban renewal agency, it would be my hope that the city manager would convene the budget committee for that supplemental budget that will be including this. Because if this if this had all happened, if the URA had happened 6 months ago, those additions would be in this document, and it would be up for the Budget Committee for discussion and amending motions if thought it were appropriate. Since it's running so concurrent, that we don't have the opportunity to weigh in on those ads, except for at a 3-minute public testimony at the public hearing for a supplemental budget one. So it would be my hope that the city manager and the city council would respect the budget committee and ask their opinions on some of these ads by convening a budget committee meeting prior to the supplemental budget where these things should be put out. I mean, we usually do the informational one, and that gives us the information to stand up and give you 3 minutes of testimony during the public hearing. But I think that there's it's a larger issue, and if there's time and it can be worked into the schedule, I think it would be advantageous to us as citizen members, to council to help inform them on what the citizen members' feelings are on this, and the city manager and the police department as a whole. So I would hope that would happen.
Just, you bet we'd be happy to consider that. One thing, just to FYI, or also to mention, the council actually has approved the plan, and actually the funding for it, at least in concept as a policy. And so what we'll be bringing back to the council is things that they have already approved for the actual appropriation, but we will definitely consider those.
But if this had happened and I'm going to use my super round on this, so if this had happened 6 months ago and the council had approved that, you would have put that into this budget and we would have been discussing that addition, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's what I'm saying, is that in that supplemental budget, you will be putting this, and it may be, I don't think it's going to get changed, and as it always does, it comes back to council for final approval. All I'm saying is it's an opportunity for us to say, gosh, 15 beds sounds good, but if you could get 20 beds and we could find a way to do it, just the kinds of things that we're doing here, so that council can have a more informed vote when they finally take their position on it, is all I think. Thanks. Mary Ann.
I just wanted to say that I had worked very early on when Cahoots started with White Bird 10 or 15 years ago. I was involved in alcohol and drug, and they do a great job, and they're very good with crisis intervention. And it's not just, it's also with the mentally ill, and that's why I was wondering about how different the vans would be. I think they work very well in crisis. Did the van have to be equipped with rubber rooms or some way to handle difficult people? These people may not be that violent, but often they are. And I was actually involved in a couple of crisis interventions where the Cahoots did a wonderful job, but the police backup were needed to get the guy into the van. There was kind of a combination working together with that. That was before it had been formalized that much. And the early ones were mostly people recovering from these problems and wanted to help. They weren't trained, and apparently a lot has happened since. But I do think these people need to be trained. They're very good, but I don't understand what the different mission would be. Would it be downtown or just a different level of service? I think we ought to flush out what Cahoots is going to do. What I know they have done has been very effective, and that they have apparently professionalized. At one time, they didn't believe in any professional help, so it has changed a lot, and I think we ought to clarify ourselves on, and especially this different mission. I just think it'd be 2 more vans doing more of the same, because we need more of the same. But do they have to be equipped differently? I did already ask about the maintenance. We're actually going to fund most of Cahoots. Is that correct?
Yeah, we pay Whitebird for 100% of the service.
Yeah, we're paying for 100% of the services, and because they do it well, we're happy with that solution. Okay, I just don't think the difference thing is that much, but maybe it is. They can stay downtown. I don't think so. I think you get these calls for people who are way out in all parts of town, because this isn't confined to downtown misbehavior. Maybe more of it occurs there, but they work elsewhere.
Andrea.
Cool. Well, Cahoots only is for the city of Eugene, so they don't go outside of the city of Eugene limits.
Go at the
Yeah,
end.
yeah, because when I worked in the ER, they couldn't take anybody home to Springfield, so we had to work on that. So so with the cleanup crew downtown, I'm hoping that, and that's funded by our council contingency fund, by the way, folks, because I thought it was important to bring it forth this summer, because we hear a lot of issues around the cleanliness of downtown. Are there plans to have them work on the weekends too? Because that's when the parties happen down there, and it's kind of funky.
At this point, there aren't plans to staff them on the weekend. The goal was to get as big a presence as we could, so we were trying to do a daily operation. That's not to say we couldn't expand on the program in the future. It really depends on how many individuals we get in the program and go from there. It could very well happen, though, because the shift that we're looking at now is very early in the morning, and based on our experience, we haven't had a lot of defendants that show up to even work crew, which is through the jail, on early shifts and bad weather and that sort of thing. So we're going to have to see how it goes. But we can take that into consideration for sure.
Well, I would really strongly appreciate a suggestion that I could suggest to you, that I would have it to where the hours that they would be willing to come. So like if at 10 a.m. was the starting point for them, that would be better than actually putting in a false thought that they're going to be there at 8 or 9 in the morning, 7 or 8 in the morning. And then I think that there's much more activity. I don't know, I don't go downtown all that much after meetings, that we would look at, you would strategize like Tuesday through Monday as opposed to Monday through Friday, if there was a way you could work with DEI to do that. And if there was more money that was needed, if you would come to us and tell us as a council, I think that would be something, because I think that most of the activity down there is on Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. And so to have somebody there Monday through Friday, that's fine too, but I would think that it would be more beneficial and there would be more work for them to do.
I agree. In part, just to clarify, the intent of having people come in so early is to basically come through before the city crew comes through with the street sweeper and that sort of thing. So there's a clear presence that we see when they're working downtown.
Well, it's my understanding that we're not cleaning the sidewalks anymore for the downtown merchants. Isn't that correct? We stopped doing that, and so even they might be sweeping the streets, but the areas that people are hanging out on and littering aren't getting cleaned, unless the shop owners themselves clean it, correct?
I think it depends on the location.
Thank you. Oh, I guess I just had one more question. And I'll talk to you later, actually, about it, John, because I'm curious. I need some clarification on what you're asking us around the URA.
George Coleman.
Just real quick follow-up with what Andrew was talking about. Also, another reason to run that other than Monday through Friday is some of these people are fortunate enough to have jobs, and in order to keep those jobs, they have to be there, and not everybody works, Monday through Friday. There are a lot of people out here that are working on Saturdays and Sundays, so that would be another reason to run it possibly 7 days a week.
All right. Any other questions for the chief?
Just a quick question. It was mentioned that it's voluntary with the Cahoots program. I'll just ask this. Is it illegal to camp along Amazon Creek in and around Amazon Park?
It is illegal to camp.
So if someone was intoxicated in that area, someone could call Cahoots and they could require them to come, or would the police need to come?
If somebody were passed out in the park, they're not committing a crime by being asleep there.
But if there's a campsite site.
If they're living there and there's sleeping bag, camping gear, then yes, they would be committing a parks offense. They could be arrested for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, we are scheduled for more committee discussions, and basically what that was is if any of the committee has questions that they would like to put to staff to help them in formulating motions or anything like that, we're ahead of schedule again tonight, which is great. But we have the staff in the room. If there's anybody who has questions or information requests before our next meeting, we have a little bit of time now to bring it up. Yes.
So I really like the idea of the increased bad dog ticket. I don't know what it's called.
Bad dog.
That's what I call it. My dog got a ticket. So I don't know how much of an increase, in hearing the difference between us and the county, how much of an increase would be feasible. And I mean, I know that there's statistical things that people, like if you go over like a certain dollar amount, they're not going to pay it at all. They'll just say, forget it. So if we could get some information on that, I think, and if we could earmark that money, and to see how much, so a formula to how much could we get us, 25,000, 50,000, 100,000 more in those increments of how much more we could charge up to maybe, so it's $45 now? 40? So like, okay, so like double it, just double it, up to that point, like go, 50, 60, 70, 80.
Well, and find out what the county is.
Yeah, well, county's 140.
240.
Oh, you're
I thought she said 250.
Yeah, 250 is what she said, so we may want to look more than that.
250 in the county?
But yes, we will provide that kind of information. That what I'm hearing you say is, if we increase it by $10, that would equate to X amount of money. If we increase it by $40, that would equate to, we can distribute that.
So, just 1 second. So, Andrea, Councilor Ortiz, the other thing that I would add is the judge sets the base fine schedule. So we'll have a discussion with him about, kind of reviewing what the county does. But it is the judge's discretion to set the base fine schedule. So.
Okay, well, we hired the judge.
We can put it on the judge. You're
We hired the judge.
Your Honor. Okay, we've got Joe, and then George.
Just a couple quick things. The same sensitivity analysis that Andrew's looking for, but can we do it on the licensing fees as well?
Dog food.
Passing the dog food. Second is, not necessarily tonight, John and company, but I believe we're referencing an elimination between FY10 to FY11 of about 80 positions, but on the Q&A response, on response number 10, it shows a reduction of only 4 to 7 positions.
People. Those are the people part. So
There have been vacancies, unfilled
Are there
vacancies.
positions that aren't populated by people?
They're vacant.
I was being facetious, but you're actually giving me a serious response.
Yeah, FTEs.
So educate me when you get a moment. And
So
we'll circle back with you.
I can
Some of them
answer
are-
that, if that's okay. So what we're referring to is the people that are exiting the organization. So we're estimating that somewhere between 4 to 7 people will exit the organization as a result of the position reductions.
The other people will be reassigned to other jobs or
Bump into vacancy.
Right. They're non-voluntarily.
If you get cut back .2, that's .2 less, but you don't go away. People stay here.
Right, but are there 80 less FTE?
Yep.
Yes.
So maybe just some type of stratification of, I know you're still working on that, but as we get closer and closer, some type of stratification of what those 80 that are comprised of.
that's a good.
I'd still love to hear from our union membership, our union representation. I think Mary Ann and I think even our fine mayor echoed those sentiments, so I don't know.
Somebody tell them.
Someone's got to ask, so got plenty of time.
Okay.
And the last thing is just struck by, there's volunteers taking care of the forest and Hendricks Parks. We have 101 senior coppers. What about animal control? All kidding aside, I'd be curious to know, is there any type of volunteerism that could be applied to animal control that doesn't put people in any type of safety situation? But all kidding aside, the emotions are just unbelievable on that topic. So just I'm beyond confident there would be quite a few people that would rise to the occasion to serve that purpose. So, thank you.
Oh, no.
All right. George, then Jennifer, then Mary Ann.
Well, actually, Andrew kind of hit on what I was going to ask is if we can get a comparison chart of the fines for the city of Eugene, the city of Springfield, and Lane County. And there might be some different wording as far as the types of violation. If we can just get a chart so we can see where we are.
Okay. Jennifer.
Back to Animal Control Services. I believe they know that you don't have a license if you get a rabies shot, because don't they have to report the rabies shot to the county? Because that's how I got my letter, letting me know that my dog wasn't registered. And it was, so I was really kind of surprised. So it's an efficient system. But so I think in addition to making sure people get registered, how do you make them get a rabies shot? Because they won't know that I'm out of compliance if I hadn't have gotten the rabies shot.
Your dog.
For the dog.
Can't put your dog in school.
They start foaming and they fall
That's why you...
So I just wanted to clarify that that's the link of how they know for compliance.
Mary Ann.
Well, that's a good thing, because I worked very hard to have that rabies shot notified people when I was on county budget. It was one of those many things the animal service people did, and that is working, but we have no idea. The thing I wanted to ask about see which one, I had a couple of questions. I wrote it down here. Well, cahoots, I think we did a good job of going through. And then the other thing was sanctions. We talked a lot about, cahoots. They don't have the power as the judges do to do sanctions. So one of the parts of this whole system, which is improving as we're going to get people off the streets into programs, if at all possible. But as someone said, many of them, I think it was McDonald, said that a lot of them won't go, and they won't go without a hammer. It's either losing your job, losing your wife, or going to jail. That'll get you to change whatever you're doing irresponsibly while you're drunk or high. And so I think somehow we have to weave into this whole system the court sanctions, because the drug court works very well. Of course, we defunded it because it worked well. And so that kind of system, and we have some part of it. This gentleman over here talked about sanctions being imposed, but people love their drugs, Nobody wants to give up something that makes them feel good. So you have to have a way to get them in there, and it sometimes takes a little clobber or a lot of clobber over the head to get them in. And so I think anything we can do to smooth that next step after they've gone through all the voluntary things and not volunteered. I don't really think most of these people want to volunteer. If it isn't the court, it's their wife or their employer who gets rid of them, and then they have to do something. So that's what I hope we can weave into the system, is the court sanction.
Thank you. Betty?
Oh, thank you. I wonder, you said 4 to 5 people might have to leave leave city employment because of the budget. Is that correct?
Yeah, 4 to 7.
4 to 7. Oh, well, I'm thinking there might be some reductions you could make, like the $200,000 for economic development. How many people would that keep? And keeping city employees is good for the economy because they're paying taxes.
That's right. Right.
And then there's the $250,000 for the Olympic trials. Is that committed? Those are questions, I guess.
Where does
Is it
that
committed?
Are we obligated?
not yet?
We aren't obligated now, but as you remember in
Okay.
2008, we did have some obligations in which we then contributed financially to those gains.
Okay. But the $200,000 isn't obligated, and that could keep 2 or 3 employees?
Again, it goes back to the one-time versus ongoing monies. The 200 or the 250,000 are one-time monies, and an employee cost is an ongoing cost. So
But maybe if you could keep them for one more year, then there would be a better picture, better chance of keeping them longer. And then I wanted to talk about the bad dog. I don't know what Andrea means by bad dog fine, but I sometimes people say if a dog barks, it's bad. And I have known a couple of cases over the years where a child had to lose its dog because the family couldn't afford to pay the fine. I'm very concerned about making fines bigger. Enforcing the license fee is another matter. That's fair, I think. But to make the fines bigger, and sometimes there's a lot of injustice in the dog laws. There's a law that says most places you're not guilty until you're proved. You don't have to prove you're innocent, but if someone says that your dog has been barking, you have to prove it wasn't, else you can get a fine.
Really?
Yes. I know. Happened to me. I went to court and I won, but it does. It's the one case where you have to prove you're innocent. You have to get it. So anyway, that's all.
Anybody else? All right, there are a couple of things that are on the agenda for Wednesday's meeting, and it's been brought to the chair's attention that a couple of the members either will be arriving late or will be having to leave early, and so there's been a request that we move the public testimony to 7 o'clock for this Wednesday's meeting, so we have more time for the Public Works presentation, and that the person arriving early or late will also be able to hear the public testimony. So make a note of that. Public testimony for Wednesdays will be at 7. Another request, and this is just a personal request from me to staff. When we got here today, there was a really nicely prepared memorandum. If that could go out electronically to us, even the afternoon of, it would be helpful for me that rather than getting here, trying to get a bite to eat and comprehend this. If it's copied, it's been put into a file and transferred electronically. That would help me. Anything else that people would like? The meeting on Wednesday is going to be Public Works, Parks, Rex, so the pools questions, the mowing the grass questions, the volunteer, also facilities, capital, roads, all of that stuff is going to be discussed on Wednesday. After that, we don't have any presentations put forward unless you would like us to bring some forward. So if you would like to hear from people, let us know. We can try and arrange that. Otherwise, we'll get into the meat and potatoes of making some motions, discussing the motions, and moving forward to a swift and productive conclusion. So, any other questions? With that, we'll adjourn.
Thank you.